Welcome to the Lords and Heroes section of my Dark Elf guide. In this section I'll be going over every single one of the Dark Elf Lords and Heroes and cover their uses in campaign and battle, as well as abilities and unique effects. Disclaimer: this guide is based on my personal experiences and opinions and is by no means the definitive way to play the game Immortal Empires. If you have a different strategy or want to add something to mine, please leave a comment down below. This guide is also made using a couple of mods that in my opinion bring the game to a more balanced and fun experience. If you want to know what these mods are, then there is a link in the description to a video I made going over each one. Now that's out of the way, let's get into the video. Overall, I'd say the Dark Elves have one of the stronger rosters of Lords and Heroes, to the point that I was almost struggling to think of some cons. They have access to a decent number of laws of magic, and almost all of them are good ones, so you're never forced into using terrible spells. Like most spellcasters, these guys are pretty defenseless when dismounted, but fortunately they all have access to some decent mounts, with the Supreme Sorceresses having access to the Black Dragon. Good mounts is something that most units in the roster benefit from, with good choices for both land and flying mounts on both Lords and Heroes. One thing I wish they had more variety in was Black Oak Admirals, as when I was playing, I only saw the hybrid weapon admirals. Some semi-legendary ones like the Vampire Coast would have been an excellent addition and a way to add more big names to the game without a full Lord pack. Another great thing is the fact that some skills can improve the faction as a whole on both Lords and Heroes, meaning you have a big incentive to level them up quite quickly to unlock these bonuses faster. Some skill trees also make unorthodox builds more viable, such as the Beastmaster and a monstrous army comp. Finally, one thing I never enjoy is loyalty, since it just adds something else that can go wrong, especially in the early game when you can't afford full stacks. It just makes everything more annoying when you have a crying baby lord demanding attention. With all that being said, let's get into the lords. At the time of recording, the Dark Elves have access to 5 legendary lords, each with their own faction. First up we have Malekith, who is in control of the Nagrond faction.
I seek my birthright.
Choosing him causes a percentage of all XP he earns to be distributed between other lords in the faction, plus 30 relations with the Cult of Pleasure, plus 2 loyalty for new recruits, and an increase to loss of loyalty chance when a lord is higher rank than Malekith. His personal army gets minus 50% upkeep for Blackguard, Dread Spears, Bleak Swords and Dark Shards, and his starting army gets a Cold One Chariot, some Blackguard of Nagrond, and a Reaper Bolt Thrower. In battle he's a spellcaster, whilst also being decent in fight since he's armoured and shielded and does some pretty good damage both versus infantry and in duels. He's great for sending in to target the enemy lord while supporting the front line with the Law of Dark Magic, and can have some pretty good sustain once he unlocks the full tree. He has the choice of 3 mounts, a Cold One Chariot, or Seraphon, which is the best one. He also has the abilities Spiteful Conjuration, Stand Your Ground, and Gaze of Malice, as well as the aforementioned Law of Dark Magic. When levelling him, we'll of course follow ye old favourite of Root Marcher and Red Tree, and then we'll pick up Dreaded Slaver to increase the slave economy nice and early. Of course his spell line is pretty great too, so you want to pick that up as soon as you can. Tyrant and War Leader are both great choices, so it's really down to personal preference which line you want to go down. You should also pick your mount of choice, but it should be Seraphon. Finally, Sadistic, Eternal Hatred, and the Wards of Cain and Hecate are all great stat additions. Malekith also has access to 3 missions. Circlet of Iron is versus a small Chaos army with 2 sets of beefy reinforcements, so you'll need a decent mid-game army if you want to breeze through it. Be sure to keep your formation as long as you can to make sure you don't get separated and pulled apart once those reinforcements come in. The item gained is great for improving Malekith's magical abilities. The Supreme Spell Shield puts you in an ambush versus a large Lizardman force, so you'll need a pretty decent and manoeuvrable army to survive. They attack from both sides from the trees, so your best bet is to either hold your ground in the middle or split your army in 2 and take on both sides at once. Either way it won't be easy, so take the best units you can. The item gained further improves his magical abilities. Finally, Destroyer pits you against 3 High Elf armies with the help of a large Dark Elf army. The first High Elf army is just a random dude, but the 2 reinforcing armies have Tyrion and Teclis, so you'll definitely want to take the best possible units you can, probably late into the game, to make sure you can take everything on. You're best off helping to defeat the first army with ranged or fast units, and saving your infantry for defending your flanks from reinforcements. The weapon gained is great, with various combat improvements for Malekith himself. Next up we have Morathi, who leads the Cult of Pleasure.
I will see Malekith crowned.
Choosing her adds the terrible corruption mechanic to the faction, which I've already bitched about in the campaign section, minus 40 relations with Exiles of Nehek, plus 20 relations with Dark Elves, minus 50% to hero action cost and upkeep for all characters, minus 25% to construction cost for sorcery buildings, and plus 1 chaos corruption for all characters. Morathi causes any lord starting the turn in the same region as her to have a chance to gain 2 loyalty, and her starting army gets Dark Rider repeater crossbows, Witch Elves, and a War Hydra. In battle, Morathi is a spellcaster and deals armor-piercing damage with a bonus versus large, which would make her seem like a killer of large targets or mounted lords, but unfortunately, she's about as armoured as she looks, so doesn't tend to do too well with strenuous combat. She's much better used on the backlines, using her spells to support her troops with some very light combat here and there, wherever is the safest. She has just one mount, Sulfet. She also has the abilities Life Leeching, Spiteful Conjuration, Greater Arcane Conduit, Enchanting Beauty, and Deadly Onslaught, as well as a mix of the Laws of Death and Dark Magic. When levelling her, you of course want to go Root Marcher, Red Tree, and Dreaded Slaver. Her spell line is fab, especially with the mix of 2 pretty top tier laws, so you want to get that as soon as you can. Again, Insidious or Tenacious are both viable options, so it really does come down to preference. Since she only has one mount, it's a pretty easy choice there. The Hecate's Blessing line is also pretty fab, and Ward of Cain is never a bad thing. Any spare points can go into the yellow tree or the blue if you want to get Lightning Strike if you enjoy Fromage. She has just one mission available, Heartrender and the Dark Sword. It's a decent battle with one high elf army straight ahead and another coming from the choke point to your left. You're best off taking out the army in front as gradually as you can to make sure all your units are moving up as one, so that none are left to get attacked by the reinforcements to the left. Overall, it's fairly easy, and the item gained is a great weapon that improves all sorts of stats whilst also providing a hex.
We interrupt our program to bring you this important message.
You there! Are you a fan of books but lack the time or attention span to sit down to read one? Then worry not. Audible is here to save the day. They have the world's largest selection of audiobooks, audio dramas, and audio shows. Basically, anything you could ever want in an audio form, Audible has you covered. They're for lifetime listening, meaning even if you cancel your plan, you can still listen to any of the books you picked up until the end of time. They have an exchange service, meaning if you get a book and realize you don't like it or will never listen to it again, you can give it back to Audible in exchange for a credit, which you can spend on any other book in their collection. It's a truly wonderful experience with 24/7 concierge-level service with a 98% satisfaction rate. They even have a handy application for your cellular device, meaning you can listen no matter where you are. You can listen in the car. You can listen in a park. You can even listen in bed to peacefully end the day before the existential dread comes and reminds you of that one argument you lost in year 3 with Jamie, where you should have insulted his mother after you insulted your father, but instead you did nothing because you're fit. So sign up today for a free trial on us. That's right, you can get an entire month for free, which includes 1 book to keep for life, and many other member-exclusive perks. Or if you're feeling particularly intellectual, you can sign up for 3 months at half the normal price. Yes, that's 3 months at half the normal price, coming in at just $3.99 a month. Now that's what I call epic. Sign up for Audible today using the links in the description and support the most epic channel this side of the internet. And now we return you to your regularly scheduled programming.
Next lord up to bat is Crone Hellbrunn, who leads the Haganeth faction.
Revel in slaughter with me.
Choosing her will grant you the Death Knight mechanic I covered in the campaign section, plus 2 capacity to death hags, plus 25% to casualties captured post-battle, and a unique right which, again, was in the campaign section. Her personal army gets minus 50% upkeep for Witch Elves, Sisters of Slaughter, and Haganeth Executioners, and her starting army gains Sisters of Slaughter, Dread Spears, and Haganeth Executioners. In battle, she's an anti-infantry machine with great armor-piercing damage on top of dodge, making her into a deceptively high damage and high survivability lord, as long as the enemies don't have any magic. She's great at getting deep into the front lines to provide encouragement to her units, whilst also picking up a ton of kills herself. She has a choice of 3 mounts, a Dark Steed, a Manticore, or a Cauldron of Blood. She has no spells, but does have the abilities Blood Frenzy, Heroic Killing Blow, Witch Brew, and Gaze of Cain. Leveling her, we're of course going to go Root Marcher, Red Tree, and Dreaded Slaver to start. The Champion of Cain line is all great, and you should of course pick up your mount of choice as soon as you can. The Greater Ward of Cain is, well, pretty great, and the Witch Brew line is really strong. Finally, anything spare can go into the yellow or blue tree, depending on your preference. She also has access to just one mission, Death Sword and the Cursed Blade. It starts you out against 2 small Dark Elf armies and 1 larger Beastman force. Your best bet is to keep your back against the wall you start at and play incredibly defensive if you can help it. Be sure to bring some good line holders and plenty of range for this one, and you should be just fine. The item gain brings a variety of combat improvements to Hellbrunn, as well as a direct damage spell. Next up we have Lokir Fellheart, who leads the Blessed Dread faction.
Commander of the Blessed Dread.
Choosing him will grant the faction some different climate preferences and a unique right which was covered in the campaign section. Plus 50% income from slave pens and slave markets, and every major port owned increases Black Art capacity. His personal army gets minus 50% upkeep to Black Art Corsair units, and starts with a Feral Manticore, some Black Art Corsair handbows, and some shielded Dark Shards. In battle, Loki is the king of Dark Elves in combat. He deals great anti-infantry damage and is particularly talented in duels and can take on pretty much any other footlord in the game and do some great work. He also has the Sea Dragon Cloak, meaning he has super high armor whilst also being incredibly fast, which is a pretty foul combo to go against. He has just one mount, Maelstrom. He has no spells, but does have the abilities Merciless Slaver, Foe Seeker, Dreaded Duelist, and Deadly Onslaught. Leveling him will of course go Root Marcher, Red Tree, and Dreaded Slaver first. Bonded by Blood is a good line, and of course his Maelstrom mount is always a good shout. Sadistic, Eternal Hatred, and Wards of Cain and Hecate are all great. Finally, any spare points can go into yellow to make him into even more of a one-man army, or the blue tree for some striking of the lightning. He also has access to just one mission, the Helm of the Kraken. It's versus a pretty small Skaven army, so would be pretty easy to do with a full stack even in the early game, and even easier if you wait till a little later into the game. The item gained for your troubles gives some decent bonuses, as well as regeneration, which is pretty top tier. Our final legendary lord is Malus Darkblade, who leads the Haggrief faction.
Darkblade comes.
Choosing him grants different climate preferences and the possession mechanic, which I covered in the campaign section, a starting alliance with Nagrond, and plus 30% income from mines and quarries. His personal army gets minus 20% to recruitment cost and minus 50% to upkeep cost for Cold One units, and a plus 10% chance to intercepting armies using underway travel. His starting army gets a Bloodrack Medusa, Cold One Knights, and a Scourge Runner Chariot. In battle, he is a great fighter with tough armour and respectable armour piercing damage, whilst also being a melee expert. He can also choose to transform into Zarkan, which will reset his health and vigour and grant him a whole new set of abilities. Unfortunately, he does constantly lose health whilst transformed, so you should only do it when you're sure you can clean up, otherwise you risk losing him. He has access to just one mount, Spite. He has no spells, but does have the abilities Deadly Onslaught, the Blood Prince, and the Demon's Curse. Leveling him, you of course want to go Root Marcher, and Red Tree, and Dreaded Slaver as usual. The Waking and the Slumber are both great options, and Cold Heart is a good pick. Drakkar Tyrant is also great, and Contempt and Hatred is never bad. You of course want to pick up Spite as soon as you can, and Sadistic, Eternal Hatred, and the Wards of Cain and Hecate are as useful as ever. Beast Tamer is another good one, and anything spare can go into yellow or blue depending on your preference. Finally, he has access to two missions. The first is the Warp Sword of Cain, and puts you against a decent sized Chaos Force with multiple waves of monstrous reinforcements. You should be okay with a mid to late game army comp as long as you stand your ground and don't try to rush any of the armies. The item gained is great for improving combat prowess, with a lovely bit of regeneration thrown in there. His second mission is the Rise of Darkness, and it's a defense versus a couple of Skaven clans. They can attack from a couple of routes, so your best bet is to use the two choke points to hold the line and have ranged units and monsters do all of the killing, whilst Malus himself focused as down Snitch. It's a tough fight, but very doable with a late game army comp, which is when you should do it, since it's meant to be the final showdown of Malus and Snitch. Now we come to our non-legendary lords, starting with the humble Sword and Crossbow Dreadlord. These guys are armoured and fire armour-piercing missiles that are great for focusing down high HP single targets such as giant units or other characters. In melee, they really aren't anything to write home about, but they are serviceable at helping their units with some light infantry as long as they don't get singled out. They also have the choice of 4 mounts, a Dark Steed, a Cold One, a Dark Pegasus, or a Black Dragon. They have no spells, but do have the abilities Loose, Foe Seeker, and Volley of Dark Arrows. When leveling them, we'll of course follow the usual plan and then grab a name of power of your choice. You can also decide which mount you want, but let's be honest, the Black Dragon is king. Sadistic, Eternal Hatred, and the Wards of Cain and Hecate are all good too, and finally, you want to grab Immortality as soon as possible. Next up we have the Sword and Shield Dreadlord. She's similar to the last guy, but she swaps the crossbow for a shield, which gives her better melee stats at the cost of missing out on any range capability. This makes her into a better frontlines fighter, but she's still not incredible, so I'd keep her on the front lines fighting infantry than having her duel against anything reasonably strong. She has the same 4 mounting options as the Crossbow Dreadlord, no spells, and the abilities Strength through Spite, Foe Seeker, and Deadly Onslaught. She levels pretty much exactly the same as the other Dreadlord, so I won't waste your time by going over it again. The High Beastmaster is next up. This guy was added along with Malus and is the anti-large lord of the Dark Elves. He comes with charge defense versus large and a bonus when fighting against them, so it's a good choice for if you're going against a faction such as the Bretonnia or the Beastmen who tend to utilise a lot of large units. He has no spells but does have the choice of 2 mounts, the Scourge Runner Chariot or a Manticore. He also has the abilities Beast Slayer, Stand Your Ground, and Whiplash. When leveling him, you want to do the same usual start, but maybe focus on large units in his red tree, seeing as he has a few others that make them stronger. Of course, you still want to pick up a Name of Power, but then Rapacious Predators is a new one and is great for the large units in his army. You of course want to pick up your Mount of Choice, since they're both pretty good. Sadistic, Eternal Hatred, Beast Tamer, and the Wards are as good as usual, and of course Immortality is essential for all non-legendaries. Now we come to the Supreme Sorceresses. These ladies are basically the same, aside from some minor differences, so I'll cover them mostly as one. In battle they are solely spellcasters, so should be kept on the back lines to support your units with magic from a safe distance, and only really get their hands dirty against something incredibly weak where they'll be totally safe. They all have access to the same 5 mounts, a Dark Steed, a Cold One, a Dark Pegasus, a Manticore, or a Black Dragon. They all have the ability Arcane Conduit, as well as their respective magic passives. The Shadow Sorceress has the Law of Shadows and Smoke and Mirrors. Beasts have access to Law of Beasts and Wild Heart. Death has access to Law of Death and Life Leeching. Fire has access to Law of Fire and Kindle Flame. And finally, Dark Magic has access to the Law of Dark Magic and Spiteful Conjuration. Leveling them all is basically the same too. You want to get the usual start and a Name of Power before picking up any spells that are useful to you. Amount of your choice is never a bad call, and Hecate's Blessing and the Wards are as useful as ever. Finally, Immortality is a must pick just as usual. Our final lord is the Black Oak Admiral. These guys are very similar to Crossbow Dreadlords since they are armoured, fire armour piercing missiles, meaning they're great for focusing down single targets from range before some light melee fighting once there's nothing left to shoot at or no ammo left to fire. They have no spells or mounts and have the abilities Foe Seeker, Volley of Dark Arrows, and Darken the Skies. Leveling them, you're going to want to follow the usual plan and then pick up a Name of Power. Unassailable, Unstoppable, and Unknowable are all good choices, and of course the usual group with Sadistic are as useful as ever. Of course you want Immortality as soon as possible, even more so on Black Arcs, since they are the ship, so you don't want to lose any of that progress if you lose the army. Now we come to the heroes, starting with the Death Hag. On the campaign map, they can damage walls, wound heroes, and hinder replenishment. They cleanse corruption in the local province, and, when embedded in an army, increase replenishment. In battle, they are very similar to Witch Elves, as they're an anti-infantry menace, with their only protection being some dodge chance. They also deal poison damage, so, on top of doing a lot of work themselves, make it easier for everything else to put in work on whatever they attack. They have no access to spells, but do have one mounting option, the Cauldron of Blood. They also have the abilities Foe Seeker and Witch Brew. When leveling them, you want to go down the Dance of Death line for general combat improvements. Improving unit replenishment is never a bad thing. Cry of War and Rune of Cain are both useful. Witch Brew is worth picking up since it's kind of the whole gimmick of the unit. The Cauldron of Blood is very worth grabbing, as well as Ward of Cain and Bride of Cain. Finally, you of course want Immortality because, you know, it's Immortality. Cainite Assassins are next up. On the campaign map, they can assault garrisons, assassinate heroes, and assault units. They increase slave income locally, and, when embedded in an army, increase post-battle loot. In battle, they are mainly duelists, so should be sent off against any lords or heroes that the enemy might bring, as long as they aren't too powerful. They have stalks, so are great for sneaking up on enemy characters when they least expect it. This combined with their good damage and poison makes them into character killers if you use them right. They have no spells or mounts, but do have the abilities Assassin's Trophy, Black Lotus, and Dark Venom. When leveling them, you want to go one of two builds. If you want to use them in the campaign, then you want to focus on the blue tree, especially Specialists and Assassinate, to make sure they're getting those critical successes as often as possible. Aside from that, you only really need Immortality and they're good to go. If you're using them in battle, you want to pick up Dark Venom and Manbane, followed by Black Lotus and Dance of Death. The Hawkeye line is a good shout, as well as Bound by Contract and Stalker. Finally, you of course want to grab Ward of Cain and Immortality. The Master is next up. On the campaign map, they can damage walls, wound heroes, and assault units. They stimulate growth in the local province, and, when embedded in an army, they provide training. In battle, they are basically like weaker Beastmasters, with charge defense versus large, and decent armor piercing damage with an anti-large bonus. They're also armoured and shielded, so should have decent survivability from ranged and in melee, but I've always found they die pretty fast anyway if I send them against anything even remotely powerful. They have no access to spells, but do have a choice of 4 mounts: a Dark Steed, a Cold One Chariot, or a Dark Pegasus. They also have the abilities Guardian, Foe Seeker, and Deadly Onslaught. When leveling them, you want to follow the Indomitable Will line, as well as Nobleborn Ruler. Training is always useful for some passive XP, and whichever mount you prefer is always good. Finally, Ward of Cain and Immortality are as useful as ever. Finally, we come to the Sorceresses. They're again the same in nearly every way, so I'll cover them as one for the most part. On the campaign map, they can steal tech, wound heroes, and block armies. They spread public order in the local region, and, when embedded in an army, they increase the chance of finding items. In battle, they all perform basically the same and should be used solely from the backlines unless they're fighting against something incredibly weak or you have no choice. They all have access to the same 3 mounts, a Dark Steed, a Cold One, or a Dark Pegasus. The Shadow Sorceress has access to Lore of Shadows and the Smoke and Mirrors ability. Beasts have access to Lore of Beasts and Wildheart. Death have access to Lore of Death and Life Leeching. Fire has access to Lore of Fire and Kindle Flame. And finally, Dark Magic has access to Lore of Dark Magic and Spiteful Conjuration. When leveling them, you of course want to focus on getting all their spells unlocked, as well as a mount of your choice. Scouting is always good to pick up for some loot post-battle, and improvements to public order aren't too bad. Hecate's Blessing and the Wards of Cain and Hecate are all great choices, and finally, Immortality is as essential as ever. Thanks for watching this section of my Dark Elf guide. If you want to check out the other parts, there's a link in the description for a playlist to the series. Don't forget to vote in the poll for the next race you want me to make a guide for, which is linked in the description. If you enjoyed this video at any point, please do consider leaving it a like, as it really does help out a lot. And if you want to see more of this type of video, maybe click that subscribe button so you stay up to date. After all, it is free. For now though, I was COLONELDAMNEDERS, and I'll see you next turn.